Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the ultimate political thriller to unpack the historical reality behind the most famous assassination of all time. We all know the basic story, right? The ultimate betrayal, the daggers, the bloody toga. But the actual historical mechanics of exactly how and why Julius Caesar was murdered, well, that is far more fascinating than the legend. So why did 60 of Rome's absolute highest-ranking, most educated and privileged men decide that smuggling knives into a Senate meeting was their only option? To understand how these assassins walked in expecting cheers, but instead sparked a massive riot, we have to look past the Shakespearean myth. We need to examine the hard political reality of Caesar's absolute power and the man they were so terrified of. Section 1. Dictator for life. Total victory. Absolute power. Picture this, it's 45 BC. After completely crushing his rivals in a brutal civil war, Caesar returns to Rome as dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. He had total control, and he definitely used it. He showered the public and his veteran soldiers with cash, huge land grants across the Mediterranean, and he even famously canceled back rent owed on housing in the capital. Naturally, he was unbelievably popular with the people. But how did he lock down that absolute control? He didn't just win a war. He changed the rules of the game. Caesar actually expanded the Senate, tripling its size from 300 to 900 members. He packed it with provincial elites and his own fiercely loyal military commanders. This wasn't just some push for diversity, It was a highly calculated move to weaken the old aristocracy and turn the Senate into a rubber stamp for his own power. Section 2. The threat of a king, the paranoia of the elite. Now, this unchecked power absolutely terrified the old aristocracy, the conservative Optimate faction. They suspected he wasn't just reforming the republic, they were convinced he was tearing it down to establish a monarchy. And you have to understand, in Rome, the word rex, king, wasn't just a dictionary term, it was literally a deadly curse. Romans took immense pride in having overthrown their last king way back in 509 BC. Ever since then, the mere suggestion of restoring royal power was a direct threat to Roman liberty. In fact, back in the 4th century BC, a famous Roman hero was executed merely on the suspicion of wanting this title. You didn't even have to declare yourself a king to be killed. You just had to look like you wanted to be one. And honestly, Caesar really wasn't helping his own case here. He practically started dressing the part. He sat on a lavish gold and ivory high-back chair. Now, maybe that was just for his chronic back pain, but to everyone else, it looked an awful lot like a throne. He wore a purple triumphal robe and a golden laurel wreath. Actually, a fun fact from the ancient sources, the historian Suetonius speculated he wore the wreath just to hide his baldness, which apparently really bothered him. But of course, his enemies just saw a crown. He even refused to stand to honor senators. Add in these wild, swirling rumors that he was planning to move the capital to Alexandria with Cleopatra, and you've got a recipe for sheer panic among the elite. Things hit an absolute boiling point in early 44 BC. In January, a crowd actually hailed him as Rex, though Caesar cleverly deflected it. But the real climax happened at the Lupercalia festival in February. Mark Antony repeatedly offered Caesar a royal diadem, a literal symbol of monarchy. Caesar refused it, offering it to Jupiter instead. But many onlookers believed this was a totally staged stunt just to test the waters. For his enemies, this was deeply unsettling, and it terrified them into taking drastic, permanent action. Section 3. Anatomy of a plot, the ultimate betrayal. Realizing that Caesar was walking a very fine line toward claiming kingship, over 60 senators banded together with a single brutal goal in mind: assassination. But the truly shocking part is who these men actually were. We're not just talking about a bunch of bitter, lifelong enemies here. We see men like Marcus Brutus and Cassius, former enemies from the Civil War that Caesar had explicitly pardoned and even promoted. But even more stunningly, the plot included his most loyal military generals and closest friends, guys like Decimus Brutus and Publius Servilius Casca, one of his absolute oldest companions. It's just a staggering level of betrayal from his inner circle. So how exactly do you kill the most powerful man in the world? Well, Marcus Brutus insisted this needed to be a surgical, symbolic act of liberation, not just some massive bloody military coup. Because of that, they devised a highly tactical plan. They absolutely couldn't do it in the open forum because the common people loved Caesar and would literally rip the assassins apart. Instead, they chose to ambush him in a closed Senate session where personal guards weren't allowed, using their sheer numbers to strike quickly and decisively. Section 4. Ignoring the omens of fatalistic pride. As the assassination date approached, the signs that something was wrong were literally everywhere. Yet Caesar stubbornly refused a personal bodyguard. When his friends begged him to keep at least a few legionaries by his side, he gave this chillingly stoic reply: "Better to die once than to live in constant fear of death." I mean, it's an incredibly proud, almost arrogant statement, and it completely explains why he just brushed aside those desperate pleas to protect himself. Looking back, the dramatic irony is almost unbelievable. There was an entire cascade of missed warnings. His wife, Calpurnia, had a horrifying nightmare about his death. The priest declared the daily omens unfavorable. A physical note directly warning him of the plot was actually handed to him on the street, but he just tucked it into his documents unread. And of course, there was the famous soothsayer who warned him to beware the Ides of March. Because of all these bad omens, Caesar actually almost stayed home that day. It took the trusted conspirator Decimus Brutus going to his house and actively shaming him into attending, saying it would insult the Senate if he didn't show up. Section 5. The Ides of March, the bloody execution. Let's dive into the tactical reality of how this went down. Because the usual Senate house was closed for renovations, the ambush actually took place in the Theatre of Pompey. Ironically, right beneath the statue of Pompey the Great, Caesar's greatest defeated rival. To pull this off, the conspirators first had to neutralize Mark Antony, who was a strong, seasoned soldier. So Gaius Trebonius deliberately delayed him outside in the street with a fake conversation. Inside, the conspirators swarmed Caesar under the guise of presenting a petition. When Caesar tried to wave them off, they grabbed his toga. And it was his old friend Casca who struck the first blow, a shallow cut to the shoulder. As the other knives flashed, we have to bust a major myth right here about his final moments. We all know that famous Shakespearean line, "Et tu, Brute?" and "you, Brutus?" But there is absolutely zero historical basis for that in the ancient sources. History, as recorded by Plutarch, tells us that after taking 23 stab wounds, only one of which was actually fatal, by the way, Caesar didn't give some poetic speech. He simply groaned, pulled his toga over his head in a final gesture of Roman dignity, and died in a brutal, heavy silence. Section 6. A bitter aftermath. The ultimate backfire. So the assassins walk out of the theater covered in blood, genuinely expecting to be hailed as heroic liberators who had just saved the Republic from a tyrant. But the reality? Total disaster. The Roman people didn't see liberators, they saw murderers. A massive wave of profound mourning swept through Rome. The public genuinely grieved for the man who, to them at least, wasn't a tyrant, but a champion of the common people, a leader who forgave debts and rewarded veterans. Enter Mark Antony with an absolute masterstroke. He delivered the fatal blow to the conspirators' hopes right during his funeral speech. He held up Caesar's blood-stained toga, detailing every single wound and every betrayal. Then, the kicker. He read Caesar's will. Caesar had left a monetary gift to every single citizen and opened his private gardens to the public. The realization of that generosity whipped the mourning crowd into a fiery, uncontrollable riot. They were so enraged they built an improvised pyre right there in the forum, burning the dictator's body using furniture and branches. Driven out of the city in an absolute panic, without a shred of the public support they arrogantly expected, the conspirators were doomed. Over the next few years, they were hunted down in an entirely new, even bloodier civil war. Every single one of them met a violent end, either falling in battle or, like Brutus, dying by suicide. They utterly failed to resurrect the republic they claimed to protect. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to take away from this explainer today. These men were so paranoid about one man holding absolute power that they literally tore the state apart to stop him. But in their desperation to brutally murder a king, did the assassins merely pave the way for a long, unbroken line of emperors? Thank you for exploring the true